Mr. Fleischman, welcome, sir. How are you? Good. How about you, Jim?
Odd to not be behind a keyboard, instead behind a microphone.
Would you like a keyboard, sir?
That's okay.
There you go.
It's all good. It's all good. Actually,
welcome, sir.
I was tweeting about Senator Liu from my chair, so I said that he must be 30 feet tall, and then because from all of his tweeting, and then I see him in person, and he's a normal size.
35
like
feet.
So. I haven't read it yet. I would say I had the Republicans on the panel, but apparently I'm being boycotted, so it's okay.
Is that a
no? I'm just teasing. I'm sure they all have important legislative conflicts
more
to keep
important
it from
than this,
being.
Mr. Fleischman?
They're enacting the part-time legislature already.
Yeah, I'm sure. Senator Correa, Assemblyman Fong, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you today to discuss Proposition 28. It's an important proposition that will be before the voters in June, and obviously I have a lot to say about it, which we'll jump right into. First and foremost, one of the previous speakers said that Proposition 28 is not a scam. So as you'll hear from my testimony, I believe very much it is. Especially, it is impossible to look at Proposition 28 just from the public policy perspective and ignoring the political perspective that overlays on top of it. You can't sever the underlying policy discussion from the dirty politics that are all about what this measure is about. First and foremost, the public in California overwhelmingly supports term limits. It was not mentioned that the question that followed in the PPIC survey on how many people support this ballot measure was a question, a straight-up question about who supports term limits, and virtually the same percentage of people that are listed as supporting this ballot measure are listed as supporting term limits. The challenge that you have here is that the voters perhaps don't understand exactly what this measure does, as we'll discuss in a little bit, mainly because of the title and summary that has been placed on it. But first and foremost, term limits ensure that we do not have a political elite in California. Term limits ensure that those of you who serve in the legislature get to return back to the public, return back to the people. So whether you're an investment banker or have a flower shop or whatever the things that you happen to do before you got here, the idea is that you come and you serve and you go back and you live under the laws that you promulgated here, and that we don't get a situation where, frankly, none of you probably would have had an opportunity to serve because somebody would have been sitting for somewhere between 35 and 45 years in the state legislature for your area, and there wouldn't have been the kind of turnover that we at Californians for Term Limits think is a good idea. I should probably add, by the way, I'm a volunteer. I'm not a paid advocate for this ballot measure, but I am a big opponent. I'm not a paid advocate against it, but I am an opponent to it. And we also have a situation where it's kind of funny with Common Cause coming up here. In the absence of term limits, we have a system in California which virtually assures that anybody who's elected will serve their full 12 years because it's virtually unheard of. And we obviously have this experiment in top 2, and we'll see how that goes. But it's virtually unheard of that once you get elected to an office in California, you simply are in that office until you don't want to be there anymore. Between the combination of the redistricting, which guarantees most districts are not competitive in a general election, and also the advantage of incumbency and the ability to get all of the money that comes in from the special interests to pad political bank accounts, ensures that the politicians will stay here as long as they want. But like I said, the important thing to discuss on this measure, or the important overlay, is the political process, which I call the anatomy of a scam, which starts out with crony capitalism. And I'm sure all of you guys are familiar with crony capitalism. That's where you find folks here in the legislature, not singling out anyone in particular, use the power of government to pick winners and losers. And then those winners out in wherever they are, whether they are padding your campaign accounts with money to thank you for the job that you do, broadly, of course, because, of course, they wouldn't pay you for specific action. Or in this case, you have a situation with Ed Roski, who's a billionaire developer who's building a football stadium, wants to build one in the city of Industry, manages to come through and get a massive exemption to CEQA for his big construction project. It's a whole separate issue about the ideology of the left.
Was that Industry or was that downtown LA?
No, this is the Industry proposal.
Because there's two exemptions, I think.
Right. Well, the one that I don't know what that guy's been encouraged to do. Maybe he'll be making the big donations for voter contact for this measure. But during the time when Roski was getting CEQA approvals from this building and subsequently after, he contributed 7 figures in donations to the Political Action Committee to put this measure on the ballot. And so you have to wonder to yourself, I wonder why all of a sudden Ed Roski decided that he wanted to be generous and gracious to a pet initiative promoted by the political class in California. That's crony capitalism, and that stinks. And I don't think the voters, when they're made aware of it, are going to think that that's a very good way for ballot measures to get on the ballot. And, of course, also several $100,000 of funding came from, the L.A. County Labor Federation, but it's not unusual to have these big labor unions funding California politics. The second part of this scam deal comes from a gift from departing Attorney General Jerry Brown before he became governor of California. If you guys look at the title and summary of this measure, which I'm going to read, Limits on Legislators' Terms in Office Initiative, Constitutional Amendment, reduces total amount of time a person may serve in the state legislature from 14 years to 12 years, allows 12 years service in one house, applies only to legislators first elected after the measure is passed, fiscal impact, no direct fiscal impact on state or local governments. Notice the operative term there is reduce. This is a sham. This has been written to fool the voters into thinking that this measure is going to reduce the amount of time that people spend in Sacramento, when the reality is a analysis was done by U.S. term limits on the effect of this measure. 8% of legislators will serve 12 at most instead of 14. But the reality is 82% of legislators will serve more time in office and not less time in office. And whether you think term limits should be extended or not extended, shame on anyone who thinks that the voters should not have the right information in front of them so that they're making a decision based on the merits of the good idea or bad idea of term limits and not fooling the voters, 68% of whom support limits, and suddenly 68% of them support this measure. The reality is that Jerry Brown has committed a fraud, and you should call him in front of this committee and ask him what he's doing by using his office, his former office, as Attorney General for electioneering. And frankly, you might call the current Attorney General forward too, because I think she does it too. The reality is the job of the Attorney General should be to put the facts before the voters and to have a discussion about a term limits measure that doesn't automatically, in a full paragraph, explain to the public that a lot of people are going to get more time here is totally misleading and totally unfair, and I believe will be the Achilles heel of this measure when the public understands that this is a fraud being perpetrated on them. I think it's going to reinforce their cynicism about this institution, their cynicism about Sacramento, and reinforce the idea that, yeah, maybe there's something about being in this place too long that makes people feel like they are the Capitol's representative to the public instead of the other way around. I will conclude my remarks by just adding that I am not a constitutional law attorney, but it just seems to me that when you put in one of these initiatives that a phrase that says does not apply to the people that are here, and I've had attorneys tell me both sides or the other, but the reality is, Assemblyman Fong, you've got a next door neighbor who's never served in the legislature, and you will have had a number of terms under your belt before this measure passes. Why should he have the right to serve 12 years in the Assembly and you not? And I think there's a real constitutional question that will be addressed by the courts, but it's entirely possible that everybody's going to get to serve more time, which I'm sure would make all of you guys happy because you're already here. But the reality is it's time for you guys I shouldn't say you guys, it's time to realize that what the voters in California want is a citizen legislature made up of people whose life experiences outside of the legislature are the predominant experience that they're looking towards when they figure out what to do here, not to figure out what they did last decade or the previous before when serving in this institution. So I would encourage this committee to think very carefully about about the political situation surrounding this measure. Again, I get it that there's a healthy debate about whether longer terms or shorter terms are better for California. I believe shorter are better. Clearly, from hearing some of you guys speak, you believe longer is better. But nobody here should feel very good and probably should want to take a shower over the politics of fooling the voters and not putting the correct information in front of them so that they're making an educated decision about what they want to do. All right, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that lively discussion. Or presentation? Any discussion from the guys here? I just wanted to say, Mr. Fleischman, that you make a very good point, which is the reason I'm here is because of term limits. If it wasn't for term limits, I would not have gotten a shot to run for the legislature. At the same time, the issue I'm debating in my mind, and I'm a guy who supported Prop 140, is, as I said before, is the fact that inexperienced legislators, I believe, we have a challenge for that. I remember when I first got here, back in '99, I met who I consider a very interesting individual, Mr. John Burton, and we were having a discussion. I did something that got him real mad at me, and he jumped up and he pointed his finger at my face and said, "Lou, just because you think it doesn't mean it hasn't been thought of before." And his point was that a lot of the ideas have been recirculated in this area, in the legislature, so to speak. And a lot of those ideas had failed in the past because, for some reason or other, their merit was lacking, and yet you see these same ideas coming back. And a good example is energy deregulation from back in '96. Good idea. The way it was implemented was atrocious, and we're still paying for it today. If you look at your electric bills, you have a little line there. We're paying for that big bond that we passed in order to fix that mess. And I don't think there's many people in this legislature that remember those good days of going through that. You know, in the state of California, we had the brownouts. You had people in San Diego paying $600, $700, $800 a month for electricity. And so I'm thinking, what is the value of that institutional knowledge? And earlier I brought up the bureaucrats, and I'll tell you, one of the experience I had a few years ago, one of my constituents called me and said, "I need help. They're putting me out of business." I jumped on it to try to see if I could work with these bureaucrats, and I'll tell you, they took me on, nose to nose. They got the press involved, and, you know, we had a fight, and we're continuing to have fights. So I don't think it's term limit extensions. It's not the elimination of term limits. You're going from 6 to 12 and from 8 to 12. The question that now is that appropriate balance between experience and having term limits? It's not Willie Brown days. It's not, you're not going to be here 30 years. If that were the case, I wouldn't be here today. So it's an interesting discussion that I think the voters will have to decide. But I appreciate your comments. I think the capital cronyism was a very interesting one. I think it's one that we have to be careful with.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you. You know, I do read your report, and it's very well written, and you presented yourself very. Yeah, I do.
We will add you to the testimonial section of the page.
But, you know, I wouldn't be here either if it wasn't for term limits. And, in fact, the last time when I was running for office, the ballot for the term limit extension was on the ballot. And
2008?
Yeah, I got in late because I had to wait to find out if the person, if I can get in or not, you know. So, you know, of course, it went down to my advantage. But now, you know, I look at it differently, and I have to look at the future of this institution, whether it's a good thing for it or not. And I really appreciate your testimony. You really provided some balance to this whole debate, and so I want to thank you for it.
Appreciate it. Well, we'll see if the voters get a balanced discussion, but I appreciate your time.
And, you know, I look forward to, reading up on some more of your discussion on this, but I think that that the voters need to be informed and make a good decision on this issue. Any further comments from the committee? Then thank you, Mr. Fleischman. Right. Thank you for coming down as a volunteer.
Sure.
And doing this. Appreciate it. We're going to